for lack of a better term, it was like this anti-competition going on. So kind of that monopoly antitrust, but it just was like these real estate agents and realtors are just, that all this ease of use and cooperation is to the disadvantage of the public. So this started at the Department of Justice. So I was like, what kind of person is like so mad when they sell their house, especially with the amount of equity gains they've had in the last few years, that they're going to form this class action lawsuit and everything else. So the root of it really gets back to this was prompted by the government, not to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but it was, and it wasn't, even a political leaning one way or the other. This happened, they're calling it decades old, but it was somewhere in the last 12 to 20 years, this became a hot button issue at the Department of Justice that they have been pushing along however they can. And ultimately, they've been pretty much having these class action lawyers who, oddly enough, are pretty darn ready to go take this cause to the courts as their proxy in the fight. So the idea, I guess, behind it, and it is specifically, when you look at, again, the roots of this thing, the Spitzer case is a case that is for home sellers. Because we'll talk about winners and losers in this thing, and the home buyers are seemingly going to be at a disadvantage and having a lot harder time, and it wasn't to, again, their positive benefit that all this was going through. But this started at the Department of Justice, and it's been carried out through these lawsuits. There's lots of, I think, silver lining to these clouds. This has been a rumbling. You'll hear some things from clients about what's going on here, and it makes, again, I think it just kind of makes it's like some of these car recalls, or I think Volkswagen was changing their EPA mileage and stuff like that. It's like this, these dirty rumors going on about real estate. So in some ways, I think that settling this is helpful. There's lots of dialogue about what this is doing. So what I want to do is I started with the history. Now I'll go to what's the actual impact. A lot of you guys have read this, and it's kudos to you. One of the first and most in-depth conversations I had was with one of our agents Monday morning, and we're just shooting this dialogue back and forth, and it just made me, again, thankful to have a crowd like you guys around me, because you're just high-level operators that are able to see, I think, where we've been and anticipate where we're going, and I have such confidence that you guys are able to navigate those waters. So the two biggest things we're going to talk that are really the two biggest elements of the settlement are compensation offers are being removed from the MLS. So the important piece here, and I did have to do some additional kind of digging in this, this means that you will not see, in the middle of this summer, you will not see in the MLS a buyer's agent cooperation. It will be stricken. A lot of these, and so our Idaho agents, and we're going to talk about that, there's some ways. You've heard me complain about Washington. Now I'll be a little thankful. This whole, we're going to be at the forefront. I've been saying that for 20 months in these meetings, Washington's got this, and it's to be at the forefront of this whole class action movement. And now it is actually, helped us along inch by inch. It's helped us as a brokerage, and it's helped our Idaho agents because we've had such exposure to that. For agents that are, in Idaho, again, is one of those more of probably lagging as far as being at the forefront. So there's going to be some very significant, they have to change forms. They have to do a bunch of things in order to accommodate some of these rules. But in both states or wherever else you go, you won't see a cooperating percentage in the MLS. What does that mean? It doesn't mean that there can't be an agreement made between the seller and the buyer, between the listing brokerage and the buyer's brokerage, that agrees that there's going to be compensation, either paid by the buyer or paid by the seller. This does not make it illegal at all for a buyer's agent to be paid out of the seller's proceeds. It absolutely makes it a MLS rule, so you will not see a flat offering. You're not going to see 2%, you're not going to see 3%, you're not going to see anything, which means it's going to be a point of negotiation. That, again, is another thing that is not on Idaho forms. It's been on Washington forms now for at least approximately a year and a half, I'll say. So we've been, again, kind of getting used to that. And the beauty is we will carry over these practices to the Idaho side where it's going to feel like a much more of a revolution. Okay, so that's the first significant point. The second significant point is that MLS agreements with buyers and buyers agents will be required. And MLS participants, anyone a member of the MLS. you have to have a buyer's agency agreement in place. We've required that for a long time. Idaho, Washington, it's been required. The key is, I'm like, well, that's really not a change. You start to look through, well, what does that mean? It actually says, and I like this, but because now we'll all be on the same playing field. It says, and this is, again, disadvantage of the buyers, so let me not digress too much, before you show them the first house. So before you show them a house, you have to have this sit down. They have to essentially, be willing to enter into this agreement or a version of this agreement. And that might mean there's 2 different agreements that you potentially have at your disposal to present to them, because what's quote unquote being required at this point is having a buyer's agency agreement in place before showing of house 1. For me, yes, concerns of these buyers just met people in a lot of instances. So how are they going to go, yeah, sign me right up, especially based on this agreement that they could be signing up to pay someone thousands, tens of thousands of dollars, and they have to do that before they see house 1. Yes, sir. It's a perfect question. I mean, the idea that how is someone going to police that? Now I'm not going to start out by like, hey, this stuff takes place in 7 months. Here's what we're not going to do to comply. So I think we're going to look at what we can do and where some of the clarifications come out in this. Like, it took me till this morning to find out that it was not just like, hey, keep doing business as usual as far as the buyer's agency agreements, because all of you get buyer's agency agreements signed. It's at what point you do. And just this morning, I discovered that, it's saying before you see house 1. So what we've done, and again, I think that we are fortunate in a lot of ways, I'll even call it lucky, that we were looking at, based on the Washington rules, we were coming up with our own brokerage strategies for you guys to be able to offer the ability for us to negotiate on their behalf, but not trying to pin things down on the buyer. We're probably going to look at offering something like that in a buyer's agency agreement that says it's, fully maybe terminatable by them, could be void by the buyer within the first 3 houses. And what we want to do is not say, you work for Avalon, this is what you're doing. But if we can lay out 1, 2, 3 options that comply with these rules, that give you the flexibility to operate the best manner possible, that's my goal. And I think we'll get there. And we already have a strategy of how we think we're going to deal with and to be honest, thrive, given some of these, the lack of compensation listed. Because again, thankfully it took us 8 months to get the darn verbiage from our lawyer that I fed the lawyer. Like, we think it should say something like this. It took 8 months to get this in place, but now we have it. So we're going to be able to work. And I'm sure Washington's going to change their agency agreement. So is Idaho. But we like the framework with which we were able to set things up for you guys moving forward. So it's a great question. I think there's going to be a workability in there. So you aren't going to feel literally like I am required, this is 3% that you're guaranteeing me. And you have to decide that before you see the first house. So this handshake must have been a really good one.
My choice.
Well, what I want to do is keep you in compliance, so you're able to say, and just with confidence present that and say, here's the buyer's agency agreement. The neat thing about the way I operate is that, yes, this is what it says, and it's going to make you, and so you're doing a good job of prompting me along. What this essentially does for me is what I've said is it turns a buyer's agent into having to have a listing presentation, just like listing agents have had forever. And most buyer's agents have done listing, and so there's a lot of cross, but it's going to create a need for a full-on listing presentation for your buyer. Now, at what stage of that, and whether that's a 2-stage process where you go, we just met, this says that for the next 3 weeks, you can just cancel this thing on a whim. It's like an inspection notice, and then within those 3 weeks, maybe that's where you sit down and go, okay, this is what this says. This says I'm going to be, and then I'll launch into our strategy, actually, because you're perfect. So our strategy, in my opinion, and I'm open to this, you guys give me feedback, but and I'll pose some scenarios that prompted our strategy. So then you guys go, oh, okay. Or again, maybe it makes you go, think about this scenario, Joel. It doesn't accommodate that. So just like what we've been doing with Washington, and we've offered that to our Idaho agents and or Idaho contracts, because we have a lot of people that go back and forth. We have a clause that we developed that says our buyer is agreeing to pay us or make sure guarantee compensation for our agent and our brokerage of X%. So typically we've encouraged agents to put in 3%. And again, not because that's some exorbitant amount, but because that's a realistic amount in the marketplace. And then we have offered this clause that we think gives you as agents an option to stand out in the marketplace. And that clause says, if we can't negotiate to get 3%, we're willing to take whatever is negotiated with the seller, whatever, okay? So now it might have said it's 1% in the MLS because we signed it in Washington. The forms clearly read out, if we don't have a higher percentage agreed to by our buyer, then we can't try to negotiate the fee up. I think that'll change. I'm hoping and thinking they're going to take that out, that you don't have to have 3% in there and then you can only negotiate up to 3%. It's just going to say it's a bit of the Wild West. So, it's not listed in there and the buyer's broker has the right to negotiate. But assuming it stays within the framework that it currently is, you have a number in there, 3%. Then we have had a backstop to give your buyer the safety. And where our minds go is think about your friends and family, let alone your trusted clients. And if you were to step up and give them, and I literally called an agent from Gig Harbor this week. We've been playing phone tag because she had a good old wonderful friend of mine that I referred her in Gig Harbor, who he asked me, he's like, yeah, this thing said I was going to pay her 3%. What does that mean? So I had to call her and say, what does that mean? Are you going to make them pay you if it's 2%? What is your strategy there? So we're having that dialogue currently right now. Before this settlement was even in place, that dialogue began. So again, not to jump everywhere, we have framework right now that says we're going to be paid 3%, but we will take whatever is ending up as negotiated out of the seller's proceeds. Whatever we can negotiate, that's what we're going to take, and you're not going to pay us anything. So I think we now are going to have a pivot on that. We might have 2 or 3 versions of this for you guys as clients, but I certainly see this as needing to have the opportunity to, again, how do you pitch to a friend or family member that right now you have zero visibility? When you look and you're like, hey, I might end up getting kind of feeling stuck on this one because they only gave me 1.5 or 2%, but I'm not going to make my buyer pay the difference. You literally now could be a range of 0 to 3%. So if you're spending 3 or 4 months with someone, are you really going to be willing to take 0%? Because our current verbiage would have you accepting 0 if that's all that can be negotiated. So you've literally worked pro bono for these people because you're not going to collect a dime for them. Okay? So that's our current framework. I think we'll probably have that is, hey, you're going to want to take, when you go to that buyer's meeting, Form A, Form B, or Form C. So we could still have that in place. You're flat out going to take whatever's negotiated by the seller. Option 2 will be potentially building in a bottom bumper to say that, yes, you agree that we're going to be compensated at 3%, but in the event that we can't negotiate a commission at the 3%, we will, you as the buyer is going to be responsible for at least a 1% commission. At 1%, I just said that. Maybe it's 1.5. You could change the number and say it's going to be 2, whatever you want. But now you have a backstop. You know that I haven't spent 3 months with these people and I'm literally going to make nothing. Okay. But that also means if they're buying a $750,000 house and it is 0 and you do put in, I'm just going to use for round purposes, 1%. Now they're going to have to cut you a $7,500 check. And what this is going to do is necessitate this listing presentation. And if your listing presentation, if your buyer's agency presentation, that it looks like a listing presentation, isn't strong and robust and confident, then you're not going to be able to pitch that to get them to agree to it in the first place. So even though we don't want that, I think option A is a much softer, like this isn't going to necessarily cost you anything. And I'm going to talk about tones, like nationally what they're talking about in just a second, meaning that there's, anyway, some expectation about what this does to who is actually going to be paying the majority of these buyer's agent fees. And then that third option is going to be flat out. You do have a number. You put in 2 or 2.5% and you have the conversation and we'll craft these. We'll be talking with you. We're going to come up with, just like we have a listing presentation for you guys as listing agents and when you're up for a listing presentation, we're going to have that on the buyer side. So on the last option would be you flat in put a number and your pitch is, here's the services we offer. We are, professional negotiation. Here's my resume. Here's what we do. We feel like this is a fantastic investment that you're going to have. We're not only going to negotiate to get you the best price up front, plus we're going to negotiate and guide you through that inspection process. And if you're feeling like that's not going to pay off in the 2% I'm asking for as our guaranteed rate, which we will, by the way, try to negotiate with the seller. And let's say, again, this is a $500,000 house. So if that's not worth $10,000, then you might choose not to sign this. Is that a little more of a hardcore presentation? Sure, it is, but absolutely that's an option. So there are 3 layouts. I probably, again, it felt a little, jumbled, but to me, those are 3 things. And the beauty is we have already had much of that factor in place because of what we were accommodating to the Washington forms that have changed within these last 2 years. So that to me is our solution for you guys. Now, here's a lot of the tone and the talk and things. Now, this to me is a lot more well-known or discussed right now within the real estate community, not really so much by the buyer community, or excuse me, by the general public. The general public is kind of like, yeah, I heard there was a settlement. They're saying like commissions. Are you okay? Because I care about you as an agent. What does that mean? And they're interested, but they're not going into like so are you guys going to go to an a la carte, buyer's brokerage system? But what they're talking about, and this is the general tone of thinking that in the majority of instances, and this is where you'll hear me take a stance, the majority of instances that buyers will be penning checks to their own agent, okay? My feeling is not. My feeling is you do not know what you're going to potentially be paid. It is forcing the buyer's agent to have significant, robust conversations to establish the relationship with their buyer. I'm going to give you my silver lining, my upside right now too. The upside to that is that everybody here that's worked with buyers, I can almost guarantee, has had that gut kick of, oh my gosh, well, you can take me off your email list because we bought a house last weekend. And you go, what? I haven't been showing you houses. We've been talking about this. And that the lack of loyalty, the lack of connection, I think that a lot of that is going to be significantly more solidified. And there's going to be a lot less of that disloyalty, and or the flightiness of that whole relationship. This is going to be a much more lock stock relationship because they're going to be signing something up front, and then they're going to understand this is a unique compensation model that I have with this agent. Probably any agent, but especially with an agent at Avalon 24, because we have 3 different doors and 3 different options for them as far as the way their agent will be compensated. At least one of them will be that they're not going to be penning a check. If the agent chose to use it, that they're not going to be on the hook for those agent fee or that agent commission at all. So again, that's kind of the silver line. You're hearing a lot of talk of, well, here's your list of services, and you give them a menu and you say, we'll show houses for $175 an hour. We will write offers for a flat fee of $1,000. Okay. And this is just, and do I think we'll see some of that? Yes. Do I think that will be the most common thing you see in the marketplace? No. Here's how I envision it, guys, is that think of a listing agent meeting with their seller. Now, not all listing agents are going to operate the same, but listing agents are already having, serious, robust, sometimes tough conversations about commissions with their clients or with their prospective clients. Listing agents are very likely, almost guaranteed to be discussing buyer's agent compensation. They typically discuss it now. Here, I think absolutely they're going to be discussing it moving forward. When you as a listing agent, I just put myself in those shoes because I've worn that hat many times, are sitting down with a prospective client, I will be talking about buyer's agent's commission, and what I'll be saying is, here's what we charge on, instead of saying, oh, our firm's going to charge 6% and we cooperate at 3% with a buyer's agent. What I'll be doing is I will be staggering that conversation. I'll be saying our firm charges 3% on the list side, and now we don't and can't offer just a standard advertised compensation model. But to discuss this with you, we encourage in our brokerage, I always liked to put things back on the brokerage, which use us, but again, you're not going to be forced to do this, but our brokerage policy is to offer cooperation to the buyer's agent. Our suggestion is to be at 2.5% to 3%. Why? Why would I do that? I read this thing or I Googled this. You're trying to trick me. Why would I pay the buyer? They're supposed to pay their agent. Well, absolutely. We have that option to not cooperate with the buyer's agent. All I want to do is paint the picture for you, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, that can you imagine a buyer is looking at a group of 5 homes, and then they decide they really, really like 3 of them. In 1 or 2 of those homes, the buyer is going to have to pin a check for $7,000, $10,000, $20,000 to compensate their agent. In another 1 or 2 of those homes that made their short list, they are not going to have to pin a check. They're going to save literal cash when buying that house. Mr. and Mrs. Seller, does it sound like something we'll want to do is to be the home where a buyer is more attracted to our home because it's going to save them cash out of pocket? Yes or no? You see what they say. No, I don't care. To me, some of the beauty of the market settling that we've seen in the last 18 months is that if this was 2 years ago, it probably would have, in my opinion, a significantly different effect. Because you'd say, I don't care if I lose 2 of the buyers or 3 of the buyers. I'll take my chances on the other 2 or 6 buyers that'll show up, and they can figure it out with their agent. So I think that there is a little bit of blessing in this settling market condition that we can all be thankful for as far as the longevity of our careers long term. So to try to do a little bit of a capture of this, we know it's going to be required come mid-summer. Buyer's agency agreements are going to be required, and they're going to be required at pre-showing of any homes. We know that you're no longer going to see any cooperation in the MLS. We intend and do and will have for you several options, I'll say, at least 3 that I just described to you that will give you the option to not charge your buyer anything, but there is risk on you as an agent that you're potentially working for free or for a significantly lower commission. But that also gives you the chance to negotiate. So the beauty is it will now be commonplace for a buyer's agent to negotiate for their own commission. That might mean a lot of buyer's agents are going, I'm sick of taking 2.25 or 2 or 2.5. 3 is my number now. So you're going to have that opportunity to negotiate the commission on your app. Option 2 is going to be you're going to negotiate the commission to a number, whatever number that you deem acceptable. That might be 2.5%, 3%, but there will be a backstop that the buyer will pay. That will have to be embedded in your buyer's agency presentation. Last is you're flat out asking asking at the point of and then requiring of the buyer to guarantee you the compensation regardless of what you can negotiate out of the seller's proceeds. And then there's lots of takes off of that. We could decide in agents, and we'll have that discussion, but I've got no problem with you guys saying like, yeah, hey, you can hire me. I'm $215 an hour. I mean, we called a plumber. Liz called a plumber 2 weeks ago that said, we're $300 an hour. So you guys can do that. And for you, opening doors, doing this and this, writing contracts, whatever. I've offered time and materials for my services a lot during my career. Very few people, probably 2 in my entire 21-year career, have ever taken me up on it. And I don't like to, because then you start talking the numbers and like, how in the world do you think you're worth hundreds of dollars an hour? And then you get into here's this and this and this that might justify that. So there will be other options available to you, but what we're trying to do is give you guys a strategy that works with your friends, works with your family. The other scenarios I want you to think about that we've already thought about is, what is your strategy for a first-time home buyer? If you're requiring 2.5% of a first-time home buyer and they and you have the understanding that there's a decent chance they're going to pen you that check, that might take them out of being a buyer. So does your strategy, whichever door you pick, work for a first-time buyer? The other thing is this. This was a good one we strategized. What about that seller that I just took a 6% listing, told them, yes, we absolutely believe in cooperating with a buyer's agent. Let's stand out in the marketplace. Thankfully, you have robust equity in your home. This isn't going to seem like it's off of Mars because this is the way things have traditionally been, and it's traditionally been that way because there is an advantage to you as the seller. We're going to make sure we stand out as a more attractive option for buyers because they're not going to come out of pocket more cash in order to compensate their agent. But think about a seller you just charged a 6% commission to, and then how are you going to have them sign a buyer's agency agreement? And is that buyer's agency agreement going to guarantee you another 2.5%. Because what if they paid 6% commission on this side, and then they happened to like a house that was a goose egg, and then they had to pin you a check for another 2.5%. So we thought about that. I like our options. All three of these doors give you options to address that. Some very simply, some less simply. In my opinion, it probably drives you right into door one if you're the listing agent on theirs and saying, I'm pitching to you that we should be cooperating with the buyer's agent. And on the flip side, if I will negotiate my commission on this side, I will take as low as 0 because I believe we can A, negotiate our commission, and B, you're already, a paying client on this other side. So thinking of those situations and scenarios is how I want, because I want to empower you guys. These are your choices. We're going to lay the framework, but we're not going to make you do anything. But we're absolutely going to be in the trenches with you. I'll be making these pitches, and so that's easily exactly where my mind goes. A lot of other DBs out there are not selling real estate. So they're going, how do we limit liability? How do we do this? I'm like, how do we make this pitch, retain clients, and then look for the advantage? Can you imagine your pitch as a buyer's agent if you chose to use doors 1 or 2, and Andrew's sitting down with somebody, they're now probably doing a little bit more of the shopping in their buyer's agency search. And Andrew sits down and goes, here's my resume, here's what I do, here's the services I offer, here's my track record, here's the brokerage I'm part of, here's opportunities I'm able to offer you because of our agent networking, here's my program, and oh, by the way, if I can't negotiate my own commission, you're not paying me anything. Holy smokes. And by the way, if you go interview other buyer's agents, you're very likely going to hear that you're going to have to guarantee them a commission. That's only the pitch on door 1. It's almost as strong of a pitch on door 2. I plan to, and then shortly, guys, we've thought about this already. Within 6 or 9 months, you're going to now have a track record. Here's my buyer's agency agreement. Oh, by the way, these rules and this situation has been in place for about the last year, last 9 months. So far, my buyers have paid 0, or my buyers on average have paid less than 0.5% of commission. So we're going to have that track record to pitch. Here, guys, is where I get excited. Here's where the opportunity for professionals is going to come, where people that are limping in, and again, nothing against them. I appreciate everybody who's making a go of real estate. Not everybody can go and get instant experience and do this full time. But for the professionals we're associated with at this firm, you guys have a built-in advantage. You're already professionals, you've got great experience, and then we're going to give you the tools and strategies where you're able to capture, in my opinion, more clients. Because how many, you can look at the statistics. It's like 80% of people work with the first agent they talk to. And again, obviously that's a very significant buyer statistic. So it's like, yeah, you don't seem too bad. We'll hook up with you, and we're told we don't have to pay you anyway. Now I think they're going to be more selective. Just like, guess what? Just like our listing clients have become and have traditionally always been, other than some gaps in, that 2020 to 2022 window where it seemed like any monkey could get a house sold. And so there was a very low value proposition for seller clients. And what am I getting out of this person anyway? Just give me the lowest fee. Now they're seeking the professional who can help me through these. Oh man, yeah, I hear it's not as easy to sell a house anymore, and they're seeking the professional. I think we're going to have that same thing happen on the buyer side, and we're trying to give you the tools in the pitch where you're sitting up with them, and hopefully what we think is as strong as the marketing plan and the listing presentation we offer, we're giving you some doors where you feel like, I've got really good chances to walk away with this buyer's agency agreement being solidified. And then, at that point, I think it'll be very exciting to think that the probabilities, not that they're going to have to buy a house, but the probabilities that that relationship sticks are going to go way up. And that, to me, is a big win for buyer's agents. It's not going to be without strife. I'm not telling you this is all just roses, but I'm telling you there's some advantages here. Speaking of those wins and losses, again, started at the Department of Justice. This thing was like somebody within the government decades. This is not a political leaning. This is within the last decades. Somebody was hell-bent on, why are these agents charging this commission? A seller should not have to pay a buyer's agent or guarantee that a buyer's agent be paid. It should be negotiable. So it started a long, long time ago. The advantages here are significantly to the sellers, because now they do have the option. Well, maybe I'm not going to pay 3. Maybe I want to pay 1. Maybe we'll just see what they ask me for, and then I'm going to negotiate it down because we're negotiating everything else in this. So it's giving the sellers an advantage. There is a hypothesis, a guess, an estimate that this is going to help lower down purchase prices. I've heard industry experts, ones that have testified. I've seen their multiple testimony in front of Congress, like those kind of industry experts that laugh at that. Oh, really? You're going to have sellers to go, well, shoot, I could have, well, before this this change in buyer's agency, my house might have been worth $475, but now that buyer's agency changed, I should probably sell for $465. Good luck. I mean, I can't see a path to make that presentation that sticks at all, but I do think that it's going to give them a chance to potentially save some money there.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
I don't want to interrupt your train. So we're talking about that kind of situation where you run into a listing agent who changes what they're offering after the fact, or like, oh no, I wasn't going to pay on that. Like, so when you're the listing agent and you want to publicize that we are offering cooperating broker compensation, how do you advertise it now? And then 2, if you're bringing the buyer, how are you having that conversation with the list agent because I think we all know agents who would say like, oh yeah, no, I'm going to pay 2%, and then, but it's not in writing, and so then you have a nice offer presented to them, and you put in your 2%, and they're like, oh no, sorry. So like, is that just how it is now, or like, how is there some kind of like in writing where we would say like, this is what our seller's offering, and we are going to honor it? And
well, there's a couple of pieces there, and a lot of it's going to be a check and balance within the actual seller community, because, and again, you've heard, I mean, more specifically in Idaho, but and even in Washington, like, 20 and 15 and 12 and 10 and 9 and 8 years ago, it was always hey, there's this thing, you cannot include agent compensation in this thing at all. Like even saying, oh, the agent's going to take 2% to get this price lower in a situation where, oh, there's a sticky inspection, we're just trying to get a deal together. You can't have, brokers, they're not a party to this transaction, so you can't name them as part of the negotiation tools. Again, that certainly flew the other direction as Washington, developed this, and that other associations and states and MLSs developed an embedded compensation in the agreement. So the transparency is that a seller, absolutely, do I think that our current and moving forward, it will say, are you willing to offer a buyer's agent commission? Yes. And then it might say range. Maybe it won't say anything in there, but the sellers will see on an offer what they're paying a buyer's agent. So if we as a brokerage, or we as a listing agent for our brokerage, offer, hey, okay, we're going to take this at 5, and then 2.5% is what will go out to a buyer's agent, they're going to see on the contract what that number is. If the agent gleans over it and the seller never notices, yeah, they could be duped, and you could offer 1%, and then it's just like, no, remember, but you have to pass that test a couple of different times, and that's not a test I'm going to put myself in front of to say that, well, hopefully they skimmed over it during the negotiation process, and then at the closing table, I hope they skim over it again, because they're going to see I'm making, 4.5%, I'm only giving away 1%. And I think that moving forward, as people know that, because agents are like, certain brokerages, certain discount firms, certain anything, they're going to look at and go, man, yeah, no, that's a problem. Every time they're going to, I'm going to hammer it out, and it's, maybe we get to 2 and it's a hair pulling experience. But yes, I know Beth does it. Absolutely. I mean, I've had agents, again, years ago, but back in like, tough market conditions of 2012 and 13 and 14, like, a few times you'd hear like, hey, I try to put your listings on our list of stuff to see because you fairly price stuff, so there's a reputation that follows you. Here, if it's just like you are having the conversations that are conduit for me, being able to compensate and not being charged back my buyer, absolutely. And again, how much can buyers agents steer their clients to it? But if they're having these robust conversations with their clients about compensation, you're just like, oh yeah, and by the way, your short list of 3 or 4 houses, yeah, 2 of them were with whatever, let's just say with Avalon 24 agents, that likely means you're not going to be paying anything on a buyer's agency commission. because they've had that conversation and they know that they are on the hook to pay. So I absolutely think that there's opportunity in that. Well, and I think to me, it's one of the cards, right? Because they're like, you know, you'd hate to get in the, well, I've met with 3 really good agents. So like, if you're not willing to, you know, work on your reputation with me, but then you're just like, by the way, here's the upside. Not only are you going to be a more attractive home, because imagine a buyer penning a check for thousands of dollars to cover this. We're already embedding this into the contract and the compensation. It's going to save the buyer money. It's just like being willing to negotiate a little bit or come off on offering the buyer some closing costs or buy downs and some things like that. Like, we're willing to pay a buyer's agent compensation to save the buyer from having to do it. That's going to make your listing more attractive. And oh, by the way, one of the reasons to hire me is you're hearing me up front, like I could not even address buyer's agency commission and just try to get the listing, and then you're hearing 3%. I don't do that, because I'm telling you that, you know, one of the reasons to hire me is because I have a reputation of that being compensation, which is going to make your listing more attractive to buyers and their agents, because again, they're going to know that they're not going to have to pin a check for your services. There are little nuances that kind of go in line with your question as well, that can we put in there, not a percentage, but even in public remarks, buyer's broker compensation offered, or willing to cooperate with buyer's broker. Why can't we say that? It's not a percentage, it's not a number.
Can you not, is it prohibited to put a number even in like private remarks?
Yep.
It is? Okay.
Private remarks and no-go.
Nope. We were able to retain the right of consumers to continue to have cooperative compensation as an option so long as they pursue it off MLS through negotiation. Or what I think, and this is what Zach and I talked about the other morning, you're going to get a lot of text messages as a listing agent. Hey, are you offering, you know, commission? Or are you offering, which again, but it goes right back to, what's your value proposition? Why am I as a listing agent having a conversation about a buyer's compensation? You know, even if a seller was like trying to be savvy and like, well, we'll figure that out. Well, we're going to be, and then we are, once this takes effect in July, we're going to have actual case study, right? Oh, let me tell you, every time there's a showing, they're pre-asking, you know, hey, have you arrived? Is your seller willing to pay a buyer's broker? We're getting those text messages, you know, and then again, then you're going to hear the agent community like, seriously, you know, I think we're going to see a whole lot of that. So, but hypothetically, you're exactly right. It could be but what it is you're pushing across an offer on one of my listings and you have a number in there. And then one of the terms that you come back is between 0 and 100% of commission. So you put in a 2.5 and I come back with 2.371, you know?
But you don't sign it, your client signs it.
Yep. Because now again, they're tying that back to, and right now, the only way you can negotiate that is if you have a higher amount that your client has guaranteed to compensate you than what's being offered in the MLS. We'll see what they do with that form in both Washington and Idaho. Yes, or the
agreement.
41C, I think.
What are you gonna?
If you use the 41C.
What are you gonna do?
I think, you know, for me, it's a great question. Now, granted, this stuff is days old, so I think we're going to have these conversations. We're going to put our ear to the ground. My leaning right now is probably to go with option A first for a while. And if I end up selling a house or two for free, I'm probably going to shift to option B pretty quick. And that's where, like, again, when you look at some industry experts and that we've looked at, like, it kind of is a real, which I think is, you know, there's a lot that, the things that are upsetting is, as challenging as it's become to be a buyer, especially a first-time buyer in this country in the last few years because of where prices have gone, now to have more of a drive towards you not having your own professional legal representation, limited legal, but we are licensed to operate in law within our forms. So licensed legal, someone who's a professional negotiator on your behalf. So you're being driven to work with a listing agent that at best is going to have, split interest and or neutral interests. And then the last piece of it is you also may be on the hook to be penning checks for potentially thousands of dollars in order to have any of that representation, or you're going to sacrifice any sort of service or expectation that you're getting on that buyer's agent side. But where that's a challenge, we can fill a niche. And again, I think that right now, within the first few days of this coming out, we've got this 3-door option that can serve the niche of those people. And then how much risk are we willing to take as agents by doing either, I want zero risk. Now they may not sign the thing, but I'm going to take 0 risk and go with option C. I'm going to take the full risk and I'm going to go with option A, or you find a hybrid and go with option B. And the beauty is, we already have the framework, we already have the, and we've used it. We've already used this legal clause that we injected in the contract, a year or so ago. It's days old. I think there's going to be some paths that are currently, opaque. We're not seeing the path that's going to allow. My potential solution within these first days of release of information is that we also craft our own buyer's agency agreement that does give so that you can do that without feeling like, I'm not going to fly in the face of this and go, screw the new rules, because they're going to probably try to go out and make examples of a few people, and we don't want to be made examples of where we can. But we can potentially inject a little clause in there that says, by the way, guys, you just want to see this house. I totally understand. We're going to have to go over this buyer's agency agreement, but I want you to know that at Avalon 24, for situations just like this, we have a 21-day or a 30-day, you get out of jail free. You could cancel this at any time. So you could see this one house, and then you could, again, send me an email, notify me in any way that you no longer want to be bound by that agency agreement, and you're out. But the beauty of this also is when it's supposed to be 100% of the time, now you're able to say that. Like, got to be honest, I'm being forced to do this. This hasn't been our normal mode of practice, but we have to do this. And by the way, we've already thought through and put ourselves in your shoes. I wouldn't be comfortable signing a buyer's agency agreement that guarantees you're going to pay me 2.5% because before I show you the first house. So here's what I've offered that I've put myself in your shoes. You can cancel this anytime within the next 30 days. They didn't, and but I think that's considered, like a public walkthrough. And more turnout it opens. Spike because of the result of more people coming, because people are like, dang, all these vultures want me to sign something before I can get in with them. Yeah, I think if you got a $6,000 credit, if it's a lender driven, then it's not coming out of the seller's proceeds. It'll be where it's coming from. Because a credit in that instance would be, a commission paid by the seller, which absolutely you have the right to negotiate. I think it'll depend. I'm sure there'll probably be some lenders that roll things out like, by the way, we've embedded and they'll be doing it as when you look at their fee structure, very few of them are collecting much more than, maybe 1.1, 2, and 3%. So if they're not doing let's just eat it to look good for a while, or, changing or charging more points that are coming out of the buyer's money anyway, I don't know how much meat will be on the bone for them to offer it, but it certainly might be something like, at least we guarantee it. We kick in 0.5%.
Yeah, maybe the bridge.
Yeah, something like that. So we're going to do that. So I could see some incentives like that. I don't think it'll probably bridge the whole gap, but in some instances it will. For me, I feel like, because at least you look at the example on the Washington side of things, because ultimately the stage has been set for this exact occurrence to happen in Washington over the last, year and a half, let's say. And you've seen, now have we seen overall, they call it commission compression, which is a fancy word for reduction in commissions. Yes, I think because of, in my opinion, sales prices and some of the competitiveness in the market in the last couple of years, you're seeing 2.5 is a more common number than 3. 3-4 years ago, that was not the case. So I think we've seen some natural commission compression, and I think we'll probably see some more of that. But in my opinion, I think that it'll be listing agents are in almost all instances are going to have this conversation, and they're going to realize like that it is to their advantage and their seller's advantage in many or most instances, in order to pre-negotiate that the sellers and understand that the sellers do or don't, but typically do want to be willing to compensate a buyer's agent. How much is going to be the question. And really, I think, again, when you look at the Department of Justice, it seems like the root of this whole darn thing was, how dare it be just a flat 3%? Like, people should negotiate. They have this damn trade union, this National Association of Realtors, everybody's buddy. So why in the world does every seller have to pay every buyer's agent 3%? We've seen some natural compression of that, and it's not like that in every place. Again, you go over, talk to agents in Seattle. They'll tell you for the last like 3 years. No, it's way more common to have 2.25 than 2.5. It's almost more common to get 2 than 2.5. So I think it's a very kind of a case by case. I had somebody ask me like, what in the world are people going to do in, Indiana, where purchase prices are $115,000? I think you're going to see commissions stay stronger there. Just the nature of that animal. Because in the end, just like we founded this brokerage on, just like almost all of our careers are based on, if we're not bringing the value, we don't have a winning business proposition in the first place. This is going to help us solidify the value we're bringing to buyers specifically earlier in the game, and then prove our value in a lot of instances by negotiating to get ourselves paid, which I like the chances of us being able to do on a broad scale. That mix of, and this is what I want us to get really good at really quick, is the buyer's brokerage presentation. Because if anybody here thinks they're not going to need one come July, I think they're flat foolish. So that's one good option, but I don't think it's everything. Like, it's just expensive to be a realtor. And they're like, God damn, okay, then I'll cut you a $9,000 check. But I do think that it'll be part of it. And depending on the agent and what they feel most comfortable in, it will be one of the cards that they're essentially showing to that client in order to get them on board to agree to the presentation that we've just made. But it's going to be a little more robust. Here's what we do. Here's a typical negotiation. Here's the difference in prices between, for sale by owner and listed properties. And again, we'll be looking at a case by case. Probably we as a brokerage will be putting together, hey, here's the typical savings we've had for agents. It'll be a pain in our butts, but we'll probably start it now. And I'm writing it down. Typical negotiation at inspection. Hey, a typical agent at Avalon 24 saves our buyers over $4,000 at the inspection. Did you see right here where I'm asking, you're only guaranteeing me 1.5% of the purchase price? You're looking at a $500,000 house. 1% that's, by the way, after we get the accepted offer. Agents at Avalon 24 average 2.5% less on their actual offers. So if you go to the listing agent directly, do you think that you're going to be more or less likely to get a 2.5% discount off the price? And if they go, I think it's the same. Okay, we're probably not going to have a lot of traction working together because you're pretty much telling me I have no value. But your mind might change when you go meet with the listing agent, so keep my business card. Because they're not going to represent you as robustly and as fully. And guess what? There's going to be a lot more pressure on buyer's agent to show up and negotiate their butts off to justify what they're trying to be, guaranteed, or what they're more transparently being compensated. So I think that'll be, that's part of it. So all these things will round it out. And some of it will be stuff we're going to try to feed you statistically. So they're feeling like it's just flat a good investment. Honestly, that's what we want. Like, to me, and the number was insane, but we pulled it and I was like, this just isn't right. And it was a weird anomaly, but there was like a 19% difference in the median price of homes listed with an agent and for sale by owners last year. I made us pull the stat like 3 times. I'm like, that just isn't at all right. They did this, National Association of Realtors did this study like 15 years ago, and it was like 9%. And I go, hot damn, there's 3% you made on your money. Because if an agent charges 6% and you on average got 9%, it was like 19%. I don't even use the statistic because it seems so insane. But these are the kinds of things that we're going to try to give you to feed so that someone analytically can look at this and go, okay, this isn't just like, it sucks to let down my good friend. Like, I'm going to back this horse because I think this is the right financial move to make for myself.
Your job.
Yeah, and I had this Steve Murray guy. He's the guy who's like testified in Senate and Congress, all these hearings and stuff like that. And he's just like, I don't know what these people are thinking that were thinking this, thinking that there's just this completely exclusive group of, agents that represent buyers and agents that represent sellers. Most agents either have a significant interest if they're on a team or actually are, very, very regularly working with both sides of the coin. So they're going to be thinking with two hats. So I think that that to me is going to be part of the reason that I don't see this. Oh, my gosh, we went from what we considered an industry standard of 2 to 3% for a buyer's agency compensation to an industry standard of 0 to 1%. I just don't see that being abundantly likely because of A, the value that's brought to the buyers, B, how much harder it is for the buyers to come up with that cash than the sellers to be willing to give up some of their equity for that service to be provided to their buyer. So for those reasons, I think we are going to see listing agents that are going to have those conversations, and in my opinion, in the major majority of instances, are going to be having a placeholder for some compensation. It's not going to be the standard thing. So it's going to feel like, I don't know where this is going. So if you want to feel guaranteed, you're going to have your buyer be your backstop. Other questions, thoughts? I've jumped around, are you understanding, there was really two major rules besides, and the other upside is, oh, they released this from liability by getting this, signatures, no. And really, to me, it sounds like what the industry is looking for is the Department of Justice to back off. So we hear Spitzer, we hear these other class actions. It was interesting to me. I'm like, what in the hell is these homeowners, like how badly did they feel like they got screwed in this thing? And this thing started decades, was the quote, ago at the Department of Justice. So I think that them being potentially satisfied, but what I've also heard is that the Department of Justice wants multiple listing services to go away. So there's other prerogatives they have, but if this is a satisfying characteristic, again, I think it could be protective, and I think that there is actual value in what buyer's agents do, and money follows value. I can't guarantee you at what rate. I can't say that it's going to be 100% of what that is today or 78%, but money's going to follow value, and there's absolutely been value. I see it nearly every time we work with one. I'm privy to many of your guys' situations where you're representing buyers, and I can tell you, with and without you, they're financially in considerably better standing because they have you. And that is why people in our industry have been compensated for the last 116 years that we've been officially in association. I think it's, what I've heard, and it sounds interesting, is that, and the other little caveat in case now that we're, a little bit getting more into the detail on it, but independent brokerages outside of anywhere used to be Realogy. Realogy is Berkshire, Coldwell Banker, Century 21, Sotheby's, ERA, Remax, Keller Williams, or any affiliated association of realtors brokerage that sold less than $2 billion of real estate in 2022. So there was an independent lawsuit filed that, was it Beth or Zach or somebody sent me, against Silver Creek Realty in Boise. So Silver Creek Realty, they didn't know this was part of the settlement, but likely they were over $2 billion in sales. They're an independent brokerage, not covered by one of those. So they have already been named in a different class action. So we're protected by this. There is, the reason this is a tieback is that that's only maybe 100 firms in the entire country that are over $2 billion and not associated with those other firms. They were kind of left out to dry. So I think there is a lot of talk of how many people are going to go, thanks, Association of Realtors, we don't need you anymore. But the Association of Realtors is has a principal interest either from their rules, regulations, and memberships for most of the MLSs in the entire country. So that's really their strong tieback. They've done a lot of stupid things over the years, giving all of their data to Realtor.com to start with, and then being so stupid as to sell Realtor.com, and then have Realtor.com go back and sell all the stuff that they gave away to agents. I mean, lots of stupid stuff. But they do have a real strong tie in those MLSs. So you'd have to have like unaffiliated MLSs pop up, which probably will. So you'll see probably some more options in the marketplace of like I don't know, which MLS are we going to belong to? And then how are we hunting for information? I've had my theories for years before this came out on, you could take down, all of those if agents on a grassroots level could have, 1 in 8 of their clients opt out of IDX feeds. Now it goes back to the game of who's holding the information. It isn't mandatory that all this is just public information. You can find most of that on Zillow or Realtor.com. That's all together with our cooperative agreement. So you're going to find some people and agents and brokerages and MLSs that go, screw this cooperation. And so in some ways, you might see less of the MLS being a one-stop shop for all of the information, and here's my other silver lining, not that I'm just theming out at silver linings, but I am. The less people have access to a one-stop shop for that information, the more they're reliant on the individual proprietary information that Jim Elgee has, and that Lincoln has, and that Zach has, and that Patrick has, because if I'm only seeing 82% of what I think is out there, it's going to be completely unacceptable to think that my perfect home might lie in the 20% I'm not seeing. So anyway, I think you can see some of that. Okay, this is like you queued me up. I didn't even ask her to do this, but so the other weird, interesting thing is.
Did I tee you up?
You did tee me up. It doesn't have to do with off-market. You can openly advertise cooperating commission on off-market properties. And there's a gray area that is brokerages can internally offer openly the compensation that's being offered, openly advertised within their brokerage. This is the potential, and this is gray, but that brokerages can openly advertise what is being offered to their brokerage. And in an off-market situation, you could have a flyer with the compensation right on it and openly advertise that they're communicating at 2.5% or whatever else right in the information, as long as it's off-market, which seems like a really weird situation. And again, look at the Department of Justice's intent. We don't want the MLS to hold all this information. So we're going to wax out the rules. We don't care. And I'd say the Department of Justice, because Spitzer's attorneys, the people that crushed in this whole thing was the plaintiffs' class action lawyers, right? But they're, in my opinion, going, well, I don't know, is this okay? Turning back to probably somebody at the Department of Justice. And they're like, hell, as long as it's not on the MLS, because we just don't want the MLS to have the power. We don't want the MLS to be able to kind of fix things and create a uniform system. We'd rather have more chaos. And there's where I think you'll see some of those peel back. Because how can they now with some of this? And or maybe we are going to live in the gray a little bit with like hey, this is, what do you have in your MLS versus what the National Association came down with their rules as part of the settlement. Like, no, we're offering this up. Oh, I'm complaining because this sounds like, this sold off market and it wasn't a technical coming soon listing signed with all of these things. Like, yeah. Sorry.
That's the rule.
Yeah. I think you're going to find a lot of pre-communication. I have a list of 10 homes that my buyer wants to see, and SOP, standard operating procedure, is I'm texting 10 agents to say, hey, is there a compensation discussion that you've had with your seller? Is there an amount you're willing to share with me that they're willing to? Now, we've tried to find out that information without it being openly and readily available. And is that wrong? As far as these rules, heck no, it's not. But again, I think that the other thing is you get the luxury of finding that out only after you had to establish whatever the world you're going to be compensated with the buyer in the first place. Because you had them sign it before you went and showed them those 10 houses. So even though you might have known like, oh, the average then it looks like is 2.5.5%, 2.55 on these, but what did the buyer sign in the first place? And that's where you're gonna have to pick. My buyer's presentation for these people was door A or door B or door C. And we want to give you that tool and try to give you the confidence that you're going to navigate the conversation based on which of those doors you choose. And then get that signed, and then you'll have the benefit of stronger buyer loyalty. Yeah, I mean, I think you'll have people, they were highlighting that as I was doing research for this. It's just like, yeah, there was a guy, I'm in title and I sell like, 7 or 8 homes a year. I'm probably not going to renew my license next year and I'm going to do a different side gig. You'll get people like that. I think it'll take some time. I don't think agents are going to want to see how it shakes out. Some agents aren't, and I think you'll get some agents that are just like, you'll find this, but like, this is a lot of upheaval. I mean, we'll kind of see whether this moves the needle 8% or 62%. I feel like it's probably going to move the needle in that 10 or 20% range. We're going to see shifts in the marketplace. We're going to see some sacrifice, and we're going to see some opportunity. I think you'll find some maybe experienced veteran agents that go, you know what? F it. I'm done. I don't need to go and like, I've had the same way of operating, like it's on a handshake and I go show people that trust me houses, and for them to make them sign up to pay me 3% come hell or high water before I show them a single house, that ain't the way I operate. I'm getting out of this. So I think you're going to see some attrition for sure. You would have anyway, but none of that's usually quick. But a lot of it is you find that the people that are being chosen to work with the people, that goes way smaller, a lot more than you see a bunch of people turning in their licenses. Thoughts, questions? Are you sick of my voice?